video is about sharing my recent denoising experience working on a behind-the-scenes sunset time-lapse capture, where I had used a Samsung S21 Ultra mobile phone shooting in its photographic RAW DNG format. When using any of my mobile phones for taking time lapses, I would also capture JPEG images along with the phone's RAW format if possible. My aim was to use these processed and noise-reduced images as a blended layer to help smooth out any image noise in the video editing phase. But I found, in this case, that when the S21 Ultra is photographing a low-light scene, the JPEG copies that it produces are heavily processed for image noise reduction, lacking a lot of edge and finer detail. My usual RAW workflow is to edit my time-lapses in Adobe Lightroom in conjunction with LR Timelapse, which is great for creating image keyframes throughout a capture sequence to help smooth out any transitional changes with the exposure or white balance. It's also an excellent tool to help reduce any exposure flicker, especially during the sunset and sunrise periods of the day as the ambient light transforms. It's also a great tool to preview an original RAW capture sequence, to decide if it will be worth the effort of editing, as the post-editing process can take some time. The obvious reason for shooting in a RAW format is to get as much dynamic range and detail as possible. With Lightroom, I'm able to recover a certain amount of tonal details, in particular the shadow areas and overblown highlight sections of the image. This depends of course on the dynamic range of the camera sensor, as there can be limits to what can be recovered out of the image. In Lightroom, whether you use the shadow slider from the tone panel or the dark slider from the tone curve, you may get varying results regarding the image noise that it can be prone to producing in underexposed areas. Lightroom has a tendency to increase noise in the darker areas, in the form of white noise or grain in the image. This won't necessarily be an issue for a single photo, but the random white noise is very obvious when playing back a time-lapse sequence. In the past, it's normally not an issue, as I've been able to reduce the noise by using the dark slider from the tone curve instead of the shadow adjustment from the tone exposure panel. My usual video editing method was to place the Lightroom edited time-lapse sequence onto the bottom timeline track. Then I would duplicate this layer, putting it above the original track, and then add a Gaussian blur effect to it. I'd also change its blend mode to any suitable mode that would help remove any hot pixels and reduce some of the noise grain. I've found that the choice of blend mode can vary depending on the footage. Here's an example using long exposure footage from a Nikon D610. In the top half, a Gaussian blur effect was added to the top layer and the layer's blend mode was changed to soft light at 40% opacity. You can see that it helped reduce the random patches of white noise that are visible in the bottom half. But in this instance, with the S21 Ultra time-lapse, my usual editing method didn't work as well as it had for other previous projects. Most likely because when capturing this sunset sequence, I chose to underexpose drastically in order to capture the sun and any filaments or detail of clouds surrounding it. Towards the end of the sequence, as the scene became darker, the Lightroom edit was able to recover more detail from the shadows, which was the aim of the edit. But it also progressively increased the amount of white noise grain with subsequent frames within the darker areas. I owned a copy of Topaz Labs Denoise AI, which I've used a few times in the past. But because most of my mobile time-lapses can run into several thousand frames on average per capture, it can take a lot of hours to process such a long sequence. Even up to a day for it to run through all the frames, especially on my laptop. For instance, this sunset sequence was 5,900 plus frames. After testing out Denoise AI on a single frame, then comparing it to the S21's original JPEG version, I found that Denoise AI did a much better job at reducing the image noise and retained a lot of the fine detail. So I decided to give it a go, and initially it seemed worth the 17 hours it took to run through this capture sequence, taking around 8 to 11 seconds to process each frame. But as I started editing the clip as a video and began playing it back, I could see that although Denoise AI did a great job at removing the white noise grain, I could still see random blotches of discoloration in certain areas. So I can say the Topaz Labs Denoise AI would do a wonderful job on reducing the image noise for a single photographic image. But in regards to video playback, it wasn't a perfect solution, even though it was better than my own method. Being a bit of a perfectionist, I tried several combinations of blend modes with layers, which when viewing it as a single frame, some combinations worked well. But still the color noise issue remained in playback. I also tried various other noise reduction methods I found online in the Googleverse. From using Premiere's Median plugin and even After Effects noise reduction workflows. But maybe due to my lack of skills or my method of implementation, they didn't do much better than my own LED method. I guess with it being a mobile phone capture, it probably was good enough, considering the size of the phone's camera sensor compared to that of a dedicated camera. But I wanted to do better and eventually came upon what seemed like an almost perfect solution. It did cost me some money, which I was trying to avoid, but after purchasing it and using it for the first time, I was blown away by the results. I can say it was definitely worth the purchase. While Neat Video Denoise can take up to a few hours to process a 5,000 image sequence, it's still a lot better than having to wait for a day or more. Neat Video Denoise has been around for a number of years, so I probably don't need to explain what it does or what it is capable of to most people. I purchased the plugin version for Premiere Pro and it was able to work on this S21 Ultra time-lapse capture at full photographic resolution, which was 4000 by 3000 pixels. It had no problem dealing with the resolution of the 5000 plus frames in the sequence. Now, with this powerful plugin, I can be assured that there's a good possibility that a noisy video can now be usable or saved. So a big improvement in noise reduction and processing speed using Neat Video Denoise for reducing severe image noise, especially for low-light mobile phone video work. But to be fair, Neat Video Denoise was designed for video footage and Denoise AI is designed primarily for raw photography. Either way, I think both software did well, considering there was 5,998 images in this sequence.